Nobody planned for this moment. In a room built for power, polish, and pedigree, a barefoot truth slipped through the cracks. A homeless black boy, clothes worn thin by nights without shelter, stepped onto a ballroom floor that gleamed like a mirror of privilege. Crystal chandeliers hovered above him, unmoving, as if even they were holding their breath. He didn't rush, he didn't flinch. He walked forward while eyes tracked him like an intrusion alert, whispers rippling across tailored suits and silk dresses. Security stiffened. Donors frowned. This was not part of the evening's design. This was a fundraiser, a fortress of wealth, a place where people like him were statistics, not guests. Across the room stood a girl in a wheelchair, the millionaire's daughter, dressed beautifully and painfully alone. Her smile was practiced, her posture rehearsed for pity. She had been placed near the dance floor like decor, visible but untouched, admired but avoided. Tonight was supposed to celebrate generosity. Instead, it displayed who was deemed worthy of being seen. That the boy stopped in front of her. The music softened, conversations died mid-sentence. Every unspoken bias in the room leaned forward at once. Poverty met privilege, blackness met suspicion, disability met discomfort. And in that collision, the boy did the unthinkable. He extended his hand, not as a stunt, not as charity, as an invitation. The room froze, caught between outrage and awe. Some faces twisted in alarm, others in silent accusation. A few wondered who would stop him. Many wondered why he dared, because in their world, belonging was curated, guarded, and inherited. And yet there he stood, offering dignity where none had been asked for, refusing to recognize the invisible lines everyone else obeyed. The question hung heavier than the chandeliers above them. Would she be protected from embarrassment or from joy? Before anyone could answer, before judgment could fully harden into action, the truth became unavoidable. Because before that hand was ever extended, the room had already decided who belonged and who didn't. And in that silence, history paused, daring everyone present to choose differently. Tonight, together in silence, to introducing the unlikely hero they never asked his name. Most people never did. To the city, he was a blurred intersections, a shadow near convenience stores, a problem to step around. Homelessness had taught him how to disappear without vanishing, how to stand still without shrinking. He learned early that loudness invited danger, and silence kept him alive. But silence never erased his manners. He said thank you when ignored, sir and ma'am when spoken down to. He folded his hands when he listened. He watched faces the way others watched screens, reading moods, measuring safety, noticing who flinched and who saw. Hardship sharpened him, not into anger, but into awareness. He wasn't naive, he knew how the world sorted people. He knew the weight of skin before words were spoken, the judgment carried in a glance that lingered too long. He knew that hunger made you invisible, and dignity made people uncomfortable. Still, he refused to surrender either. He stood straight even when bowed by circumstance, holding on to a sense of self no shelter could provide. Tonight, among tuxedos and champagne flutes, he did not mistake wealth for worth. He recognized fear disguised as superiority, discomfort masquerading as decorum. Where others saw a trespasser, he saw a test of character. Where others calculated risk, he listened to something quieter inside himself. Courage, for him, was not loud rebellion. It was restraint. It was choosing kindness when cruelty would have been easier, choosing respect in a room built on exclusion. He did not arrive with a plan to disrupt anything. He arrived as he always did, observing, absorbing, waiting. And as the music played and laughter skimmed the ceiling, his eyes kept returning to one corner of the room, not to the powerful, not to the applauded, but to someone else, placed carefully out of the way. Smiling through a loneliness no amount of money could hide. He understood rules that were never written, boundaries enforced by looks alone. He learned when to step back, when to lower his eyes, when to make himself smaller so others could feel larger. Yet somewhere inside him lived an untrained defiance, a belief that humanity did not require permission, and that seeing someone fully was an act no one could forbid. Even survival had not extinguished his instinct to protect others. What no one knew was that he'd been watching someone else suffer in silence too. The villain isn't one person, it's the room. The ballroom called itself generous, gold-trimmed. Walls echoed with speeches about opportunity, compassion, and giving back. Waiters glided silently, refilling glasses that cost more than a week of groceries. Laughter floated easily here, practiced and selective, never lingering too long on anything uncomfortable. This wasn't cruelty with a raised voice. It was cruelty wrapped in etiquette. The kind that smiles while excluding, that praises inclusion while enforcing invisible boundaries. No one said the rules aloud, but everyone knew them. Who deserved eye contact? Who deserved patience? Who deserved to be moved politely out of the frame? She sat near the edge of the dance floor, the millionaire's daughter, introduced earlier with applause and careful phrasing. Not fragile, not tragic, just different enough to make people uneasy. Guests offered sympathetic nods instead of conversation, compliments instead of curiosity, pity instead of partnership. Her disability made her visible, but never central, present but never chosen. People spoke around her, not to her. They praised her courage as if existence itself were an accomplishment. They assumed her limits without asking, her preferences, without listening. In their minds, protection meant distance. Respect meant avoidance. And isolation wore the costume of kindness dot across the room. Donors whispered about appearances, about propriety, about how things might look. Some noticed the boy and stiffened, already assigning motives he had never claimed. Others looked away, relieved not to be responsible for what happened next. Silence became a vote, and most of the room cast it eagerly. This was the villainy no one wants to name. Not a single bad actor, but a system of comfort that pernicious disruption. A culture that rewards indifference and calls it neutrality. Ableism that hides behind concern. Classism that pretends to be standards. Prejudice polished until it passes as normal. The room had power, and it used it quietly. To decide who could dance, who could ask, who could belong without explanation. Every whisper reinforced the same truth. Stay in your place and we'll call ourselves good people. No one needed to shout him down. The architecture of judgment was already built. All it required was compliance. In this space, morality was outsourced to donations, conscience replaced by checks. Guests congratulated themselves for being on the right side of history while refusing to look directly at it. Discomfort was treated as danger, difference as disruption. It was safer to protect tradition than to challenge injustice. Safer to maintain appearances than to practice empathy. Safer to let silence speak than to risk standing alone. Everyone benefited from the order, and everyone feared the cost of. Were questioning it in public, together, tonight, there, and then something happened that shattered every unspoken rule in that room. The question that froze time. He moved before anyone could stop him. One step, then another, across marble meant to intimidate the unsure. Each footfall echoed louder than the music, louder than the rules everyone pretended not to know. Conversations thinned into murmurs, heads turned. The room leaned back in, its seat bracing. People felt it in their chests first. That tightening fear of public discomfort. The instinct to protect appearances at all costs. Some thought he was lost. Others assumed provocation. No one imagined sincerity. Because sincerity, from someone like him, had never been invited here. He walked slowly, deliberately, not performing, not apologizing. His eyes stayed level, respectful. He wasn't looking for permission, he was looking for a person. With every step, assumptions shattered and reformed, louder this time, meaner. This was how tension traveled in polite spaces, disguised as concern. When he reached her, the music softened as if the room itself hesitated. She looked up, surprised not by his presence, but by his calm. Not pitying, not rushed, just present. He stopped at a respectful distance, hand steady, voice quiet enough to require listening. Would you like to dance? No flourish, no charity, no spectacle. A simple question asked the way equals ask each other things. For a split second, time abandoned the room, breath caught, glasses froze mid-door. 100 futures collapsed into one unbearable pause. Fear rushed in to fill the silence. Fear of mockery, fear of humiliation, fear that kindness might backfire and make everyone look foolish. Some guests winced, already preparing excuses on his behalf. Others stared at her, silently begging her to refuse, to save them all from discomfort. But the question itself had already done the damage. It exposed how rare dignity was here, how revolutionary it felt to offer choice instead of protection, invitation instead of management. In that moment, disability and poverty lost their assigned meanings, replaced by something far more dangerous to hierarchy, the quality. Her eyes flicked across the room, registering the tension, the warning looks, the unspoken pressure to behave correctly, and then back to him. He didn't rush her, he didn't fill the space. He waited, trusting her answer mattered more than the room's relief. Hope crept in, fragile and defiant. Not hope for approval, but hope that this moment could belong to them alone, even briefly. And as the silence stretched, the room realized something irreversible had already happened. It challenged every narrative they rehearsed about safety, charity, and control, forcing the room to confront a truth it avoided. That equality is frightening when it arrives uninvited, unscripted, and undeniable, especially in spaces built to reward obedience over shared humanity collectively. Because the reaction that followed wasn't applause, it was outrage. When compassion meets cruelty, the room broke its silence with disapproval disguised as concern. Whispers surged like a current, sharp and fast, naming danger where none existed. Faces tightened, not with care for her feelings, but fear of embarrassment spreading beyond control. Someone muttered that he was mocking her. Another suggested securities intervened before things became inappropriate. Kindness was suddenly recast as threat. Compassion, they decided, needed supervision. The crowd did not ask what she wanted. They asked how this looked. In that shift, the boy stopped being human and became a problem to manage, and order mattered more than empathy ever could hear. Security shifted uneasily at the edges of the floor, hands hovering near radios, unsure whether they were protecting a girl or protecting decorum. No one gave a command. None was needed. Wealth teaches its own reflexes. The suggestion of disruption was enough. Guests leaned toward one another, rehearsing narratives that would absolve them later. He was confused. He was inappropriate. He did not understand boundaries. None of those whispers included her voice. None considered that dignity does not require permission slips or background checks. They only measured risk to themselves, never harm inflicted on her or their conscience that night. Across the room, a man watched without moving. He did not announce himself, but his stillness carried weight. The girl's father read the room, the way powerful men do, calculating consequences instead of courage. Pride battled fear behind his eyes. He had funded ramps and programs and speeches, yet here was a moment money could not choreograph. If this went wrong, donors would talk. If it went right, control would be lost. He remained seated, choosing observation over intervention. The room reflected his hesitation, waiting for authority to make morality easier for everyone else present there. Tonight, watching silently judge, she felt the shift immediately. Not the boy's question, but the room's recoil. Eyes moved to her like warnings, not invitations. She sensed the pressure to save them, to decline politely, to protect their comfort. The pain settled deeper than embarrassment. It was familiar. Being managed, being spared, being denied choice in the name of care. Her hands tightened, not from fear of him, but from the weight of expectation closing in. Years of quiet exclusion pressed down, reminding her how rarely the world asked what she wanted, who she was, or how she felt inside those moments like this. The crowd mistook restraint for resolution. They thought the moment would dissolve under pressure, that discomfort would restore order. Some already relaxed, convinced decency had been defended, but something fragile and dangerous lingered in the air. The boy remained still. The music continued, and she looked at him, really looked, seeing not risk but recognition. Just when it seemed the moment would collapse under cruelty's weight, she chose something else, a decision no one authorized, one that would force the room to confront itself and reckon with the limits of their carefully curated compassion forever after tonight, there, then alone. The dance that changed everything, she nodded. A small, deliberate motion, almost imperceptible, but enough. The boy's hand extended again, steady and patient, and this time, no one dared interrupt. A hush fell over the room so profound that even the chandelier seemed to dim in acknowledgement. It began awkwardly hesitant steps, unpracticed rhythms, bodies learning one another's limits and possibilities. He adjusted instantly to her pace, matching her movements, without drawing attention to the awkwardness. There was no pity in his eyes, no rush, only the quiet insistence that she belonged here, right now, fully and without question. The ballroom, so accustomed to polished motions and flawless performances, seemed to hold its breath. Silence hung heavy at first, then subtly shifted. Some guests began to notice the authenticity of the moment. The boy wasn't performing for them. The girl wasn't performing for them. They were creating a shared space untouched by expectation or pretense, a human connection the room had never been prepared to witness. It was an imperfection that felt more perfect than any rehearsed spectacle. With every turn, every pause, the miracle unfolded not in gracefulness, but in the courage it took to exist freely in a space designed to punish deviation. Each smile she allowed herself, each confident step he guided her through, was a silent defiance of the unspoken rules that had kept them apart. The room's walls of judgment softened, if only slightly, under the gravity of two people claiming dignity without asking for permission. Eyes widened, whispers faded into stunned silence. Some tried to rationalize it, to explain it away. Lucky coincidence, fleeting rebellion, momentary confusion. But no words could undo the raw, undeniable truth in front of them. Courage, respect, and humanity could not be contained by wealth, status, or fear. They were witnessing a miracle born not from money or design, but from empathy and presence. As the music swelled, imperfections became rhythm, hesitations became dialogue. Every step carried weight, not for spectacle, but for validation, each of them affirming that they were worthy of visibility, worthy of joy, worthy of being chosen simply for being themselves. The room, accustomed to appearances, now confronted authenticity, and authenticity refused to bow, and just as the final note lingered, echoing softly against polished walls, it became clear that the miracle was not just in the dance, not in the steps or the rhythm, or even the courage to say yes. The real revelation was much larger. The biggest revelation wasn't the dance, it was who had been watching all along. The millionaire steps forward. He rose slowly from his seat, the weight of every expectation pressing on his shoulders. The father of the girl, the man whose wealth could fill rooms like this with certainty, moved not with authority, but with a quiet reckoning. Eyes that had measured people, that had judged who was worthy and who was not, now softened as they fell on the boy. Recognition replaced assumption. Authority gave way to reflection. He cleared his throat, not to scold, not to assert control, but to speak the truth he had long avoided. "I've spent too many years teaching my daughter how to be careful," he said, voice steady but humble, "and in doing so, I forgot how to see courage when it steps right in front of me." There was a pause, a collective intake of breath, from those who had been watching, waiting for reprimand. None came. Instead, something rarer emerged: accountability. He turned to his daughter, his eyes meeting hers with pride, relief, and apology. "You have taught me more tonight than I could have imagined. Your joy, your willingness to embrace life fully, reminds me what truly matters." The room had waited for spectacle, but he delivered honesty, and then he faced the boy, extending recognition that no amount of privilege could buy. "You," he said, "have shown all of us what dignity looks like when it is freely given." The balance in the room shifted subtly yet irrevocably. Power did not disappear, it transformed. Money, influence, social standing all remained, but they bowed to morality, empathy, and courage. The boy, long invisible, became seen. The girl, long shielded, became celebrated. And the father, long accustomed to instructing others on how to behave, became the witness to a truth that no lesson could have taught him. The murmurs in the room were no longer judgmental. They were thoughtful, reverent, a reflection of the awakening that had quietly spread through the gathered elite. The dance, the courage, the honesty, they were contagious, reshaping the space more than any speech or donation ever could. In that moment, morality eclipsed money, and the impossible became unmistakably real. And within hours, the moment escaped the room and swept the nation. When the internet took sides by morning, the video was everywhere. Clips of the boy extending his hand, of the girl smiling as she accepted, spread across timelines and feeds, shared with captions that ranged from awe to outrage. Millions paused, scrolled back, watched again, as strangers felt the weight of that single moment. Hashtags emerged like wildfire. Hashtag dignity unscripted. Hashtag courage without permission. Hashtag dance of humanity.